Hello, everybody, and welcome back to All Things M365 Compliance. I am, of course, Ryan John Murphy, former Microsoft MVP, data security champion here at Microsoft, and also an e-discovery advocate. And of course, I'm joined by Nikki. Hey, Nikki.
Hi Ryan, hi everyone. My name's Nikki Chapple. I'm a Microsoft MVP in Microsoft 365 and security and the principal cloud architect at Cloudway. And I'm passionate about everything data security, governance, risk and compliance. And today we've got a special guest with us, Rafah Knight, who is an expert in AI and security and that whole governance, risk and compliance. And I think now is just that perfect time to really understand how AI works. So welcome, Rafa.
Thank you so much, Ryan and Nikki. I'll give everyone a high-level intro into who I am. So my name is Rafa, and I head up an organization called Secure AI. So we work at the intersection of AI and security and sort of support organizations with any GRC sort of challenges that they might have. And something else that I always tell people about myself, which is a really important fact, is I own a wonderful cat called Missy, and she's a tabby rescue.
Raf, I think we kind of met this time last year, right? I think it was at InfoSec, and there was an immediate connection there around mine and Nikki's world from the M365 compliance purview world as we know it today, and that governance into AI, and then your world coming into ours from the regulatory standpoint as well. So it's always interesting to hear mine and Nikki's side of things of how you can build the technology to map to certain regulatory alignments and principles and so on and so forth. But tell us a bit about your side of the fence.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a huge advocate of AI, and I think AI can sort of has the potential to make environments more inclusive, better for everybody, more efficient, to give organizations time back so they can focus on the creative bits, the revenue generating bits. And so the bit that I look after, which I'm very passionate about, is the security element of the adoption journey. So when we adopt AI, it's not as easy as just buying something off the shelf or just bringing it into your environment. There's a whole culture shift that happens. And that culture shift from end to end will involve things like governance. So that could be plans, procedures, processes, but also how you roll that out and the sort of roadshow that you take them on and bringing your own people on that journey. And then other than that, we then would also do things like workshops. So understanding how AI could actually help someone within their specific role, within their team, because every team and every role is different. So sort of building personas around that. And then sort of other things that we do is we'll measure the existing AI security posture of an organization and then the target. And we do that again, sort of over 300 controls. So that's a really in-depth sort of look at it all. But I would say that what we're really, really, really passionate about at Secure AI is making sure that organizations know that they don't have to compromise on security to adopt AI. And that's why a tool like Microsoft Copilot is so powerful. It's on your own tenant, it's secure, and you don't have to worry about data loss and sort of going out into the outside world. It's not like ChatGPT. But something to kind of remember is that you still have to put in guardrails and safeguards and make sure that it's governed and secured properly. And so that's the bit that organizations sometimes forget. But it is so much more secure than when sort of you allow your employees to just go and use anything they want. And a big sort of security threat that we constantly see is shadow AI, which for anyone that's listening is essentially when people who work within an organization use their personal credentials to use AI, and that can lead to huge amounts of data loss, which can be horrific for organizations. That could be data that belongs to your customers, your employees. And so having a tool that sits on your own tenant in your own infrastructure that is really secure is a massive game changer. So that's why I'm so passionate about AI and a tool like Microsoft Copilot.
That's good to hear, especially for me and Nikki. So there's a lot to unpack there. And I think just a couple of things, some of the conversations that me and Nikki have all the time, and even with people that we have on as guests, is applying that confidence beyond the IT people. So you've got the friends of IT, let's call it. So you've got your architects, your consultants, and all the rest of it who really want to rush forward and embrace a solution like Copilot, whether it be a Gen AI Copilot, Microsoft or not. There's benefits to all, right? But I guess I just picked on something there that you said is providing essentially that confidence back into the likes of the legal team, maybe even CISOs, maybe even chief AI officers, as we're seeing now coming around the corner as a job advertisements. I guess you'd have your own unique way of doing that at Secure AI because you obviously work with lots of different AI apps, Rafa. But how do you find those conversations initially when they're coming at you? Because some of these people really do come at you. They don't really ask you questions. They tell you answers to questions they don't understand.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I love that question. That's a really good question. So, one of the things that we've seen is we've seen people who will really champion AI internally, and those can either be CISOs or they can be CTOs or whatever, and they really see the value. And I wish that was the majority, but that's probably a very small minority. The majority is we often will come across anything from procurement to risk to compliance to governance to legal teams who take the same approach to AI that they would to any other risk without often understanding what AI really is, how AI functions, different models that AI used to operate, what it can bring for people, how it can actually improve security. And so that sort of conversation can often be very, very interesting. And so one of the things that we always say is, well, if you have an AI sort of company coming through your procurement process, what questions are you asking them? Are you asking them things like, can you provide us your responsible AI policies? Like, how responsible is your AI? And that's what Microsoft does quite well, because there's an entire hub on responsible AI, not just a 3-page, PDF that someone made the night before because they wanted to sell you something. And there are dedicated resources around that. So we look at that. Something else we look at is data security. We know that so much with AI is actually data security, and it's encouraging those legal teams to actually understand where the real threat is. And we believe, and this isn't just something we believe because it's nice to believe, it's because that's what the data tells us, that I believe the stat is something around 98% of shadow AI across organizations right now. So the figures are massive. So even if organizations don't allow or actively encourage people to use AI, your employees downloaded ChatGPT on their laptops or on their phones 3 years ago. They're already using it. They won't stop using AI. They've already figured out how to make their roles more efficient. And what you need to do instead is make it secure. So I think another piece of that is actually helping organizations understand what that looks like. So one of the things that we tend to do for most clients is actually sort of help them understand what the shadow AI landscape looks like. Because initially they'll be thinking, oh, but it's such a risk to adopt AI. I don't know if we want to get more licenses. We don't know if we want all teams using this. And then suddenly when you run sort of an internal scan, when you look at what your employees are going on, how they're using it, when you run workshops, you then start figuring out that actually the current threat landscape looks a lot worse than you could have possibly expected, sorry. And actually the best thing you can do is bring on board a tool that is safe, secure within your own tenant. You own the data, you control the data. Your data is not being used to train a model outside of your infrastructure and then being sold in whatever place. And having that control is really, really important. So I think that the problem is also outside of the fact that those teams take the same approach that they would to any vendor, and they don't really take an AI approach to it, which is really important. And we've actually seen that from the EU AI Act, we've seen that from the OECD, and we've seen that from NIST, where they've actively said to those teams it's important to embody a risk-based approach to AI and to have a very AI-based approach to assessing AI vendors. It's not like assessing other vendors. So it's totally different. And that can make people feel a bit uncomfortable sometimes, right? Because you're in this role, it's your role, right, as procurement or risk or compliance or legal to capture that risk and understand it. But I really believe that actually the best thing that you can do is bring on, like DSIT said, Department of Science, Innovation, Technology in the UK, is bring on SMEs to help you understand that risk, not just to try and go at it alone. Because the commercial advantage you gain from not just using AI, but really adopting AI is incredible. It's one thing for employees to just be using AI. It's another thing to have a top-down approach that we are going to go at, 20%, we're going to go at 40%, we're going to go at 80%, we're going to leverage it in our financial processes, we're going to leverage it for our customer experience. That will transform your organization. And we've worked with clients who've come really late to the game, and then they're going, what do we do with AI? We've also worked with clients who said, oh, we're very, very old school, so we probably don't need a lot. And the reality is, if you look at your competitors and you look at what they're doing, they are using AI, and they're using different types of AI. And one of the things we've seen come out of Microsoft now is agentic AI, and it's constantly evolving and it's constantly changing. So I think that managing the conversations with those teams is not easy, and it can be really, really difficult. Yeah, go.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Like, one thing you mentioned, yeah, me and Nikki talk about this all the time, right? Whether it's online on this podcast or offline, just in general conversations, is, and we've spoke about this as well before, Rafa, is there seems to be at times an institutionalized view to the fact that by Copilot or any Gen AI app that they integrate in their environment creates a risk. Okay.
Yeah.
We know between the three of us, right? That that risk and that governance risk has always been there. Just that Gen AI tool, M365 Copilot, actually highlighted that risk. Me and Nikki talk about this a lot. That's purely down to poor governance on Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, and so on and so forth. So that's definitely something I hear a lot of. I don't want this tool because it creates a risk. No, the risk is already there. It just highlights the risk.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I find also when I'm speaking to organisations, they have that thing. It's like a black box, isn't it? Microsoft 365. It's unstructured data. They haven't necessarily done the work they needed to before. It's security by obscurity. And when they say, no, we're not ready, they're not looking at the risk of not doing anything. So like whenever you do any activity, you need to look at all of the risks. But one of those risks is I don't do it. They don't realise, as you mentioned earlier, that people have already gone and used, third-party AI apps. I think Microsoft did a report, I think it's probably about a year old, and they were saying like 76% of employees are already using their favourite AI app. And the worrying thing is that that's so embedded into their DNA that it's saying now if companies introduce Gen AI apps, they're going to have a really hard job to take people away from those shadow AI apps because they might not do, they might not perform in the same way. People have got used to things. So I think it's really important that even if people don't want to open the doors completely, they need to be focused on that and saying, how can we introduce it and how can we minimize those risks?
No, absolutely. And I think when we look at sort of risk minimization and identifying the risk to sort of begin with, and actually going back to what you just said as well, Ryan, I think I literally have used this metaphor before. But if you find sort of mouse droppings in your house and you find one mouse, and then you bring someone in to identify kind of where the mouse is living, and they find 10 other mice, that person, that professional you brought in, hasn't created an infestation. They've identified it for you. And that's what Copilot is doing. It's identifying and highlighting vulnerabilities within your infrastructure. It's not creating them. And that's a really important distinction. And I think also, Nikki, you mentioned something really important around people getting used to using a tool, and they've now used it for a long time. And actually, that is a huge challenge, because we're seeing that even when an organization will now adopt AI, employees have gotten so used to using XYZ tool, whether it's ChatGPT or something else, and they're used to using it, using their personal credentials. So an organization has no view of what data is going in there, and it can be really, really difficult to manage. And that is why you've got to take people on a journey with you. And this is what I think sometimes organizations slightly miss, is adopting AI is just, it's not about just buying a license. It's not about just making a purchase. It's a cultural change and a cultural shift. And you must bring people on that change with you. One of the things that I always recommend to whoever I'm speaking to when they say, oh, I was literally speaking to a CISO of a law firm a week ago, and he was saying, yeah, we're really interested in AI, and I'm interested in this agentic AI stuff, but I'm not sure like how to use it. And I said, well, Microsoft holds like hosts a monthly sort of event at their headquarters in Paddington, and they provide sessions, and it's all free, and you could go and you can learn. And it's having a learning mindset, because Microsoft products operate in a different way to other products do, and also they are secure. And that's the bit, as someone who's a security professional, the thing that I care the most about is security, but also bringing people on that journey. If you just say to someone, this is a secure tool, you must use it. They're going to turn around and go, but why? But it's them bringing people on that journey with you. So then beyond having that learning mindset, it's also investing in your people. And buying a license is not investing in your people. It's not. Buying a license is a great first step. But the next bit that you need to do is you need to actually help people understand, how do I use Microsoft Copilot within my role, within my team, for my tasks? And that requires building up personas, which we've done for organizations, to say, as an example, my name is John Doe and I work in the finance team at a retail organization, and these are my tasks. And then sitting down with John Doe and going, right, what is AI really good at here? What do you enjoy doing, John? Like, what are the bits that you wish you could do more of? What are the bits that are really revenue generating for your organization that your organization wishes that you could do more of? And it's getting AI to do the bits that AI is really good at, and it's allowing human beings to be creative. Now, that, in my opinion, is a totally different approach to just going, company, we would like to notify you all that we have now purchased X licenses. You will find this sort of accessible through Teams, and you can click on it and you can now start interacting it. Please use this. Like, those are different interactions, and it's recognizing, like you said, that it's become built into people's DNA, how they interact with this tech. So we need a cultural shift. But for that to happen, you need to invest in conversations with your people, in training with your people, not just buying a tool. And often people will turn around and say that, as an example, but Microsoft Copilot might not do it the way that ChatGPT does it, or might not do it the way these other tools have done it, the way that I've gotten used to them. And my response to that often is, but that's because we've now, from a sort of a brain perspective, become used to using it in that way. And that is exactly why you need to invest time in explaining to people and training people how to use it in a different way. AI models are built differently and have different functionalities. And that's the thing, because it's like, if I hope this is a good analogy, it's like if I gave someone a key that kind of worked, but like didn't really work very well for a house, and it worked for their previous house, and it sort of works for the new house, but it's not great. And then they're having to figure out, and they're going, oh, I really prefer my old house because the key just opened the door immediately. And it's actually changing the key altogether and going, we need a new kind of mental approach to this. We need a new way of interacting with it. And that is really, really, really important. It's not just, you cannot expect Microsoft Copilot to behave the way that other tools do. It behaves the way that Microsoft Copilot behaves. And so therefore we need to adapt the way that we use that tool. And that is really, really, really important, because as someone in risk, compliance, procurement, if you sit in those teams and you want to manage the AI risk, then I would say the best thing you can do is actually understand what people are using and how to sort of transfer that over into a secure tool. And that is never going to happen if you just send out a mass email, which we've seen so many organizations do, going, we've bought 10 licenses, who wants to trial this? And then keep buying more and never explaining to people how to use it differently.
Yeah.
So I find that one of the tools that I find really useful is the ProSci ADCAR process on, like, organizational change management, where you have to go through those 5 steps. You have to build that awareness. You then want to kind of get that desire with the kind of the personas approach. Then you've got the knowledge part. I can't remember what it was. The ability and have the skills to do it, but then it's the reinforcement. So that whole process to unlearn and relearn can actually take kind of 9 months. There are a number of different methods of kind of big transformational change management, but you do have to kind of go through all of those kind of steps. And as you mentioned, find the right use cases for the right different departments, because every user, every department, every organization is going to be slightly different.
And Nikki, my favorite thing that I always hear is when we're brought in and an organization hasn't bought any AI tools yet, and they turn around and they say, so we're going to now begin our AI journey. It's already begun. It began with ChatGPT when your employees started using it without your knowledge. Like, you're not beginning your journey. It's already started. And to your point, they never think about that 9 month or whatever journey to have that cultural shift and change the way that people interact with it.
We see all the time, and I think you both kind of expressed it well enough to me for me to make a bit of a structure out of it, is the fact that the enablement of these things is very easy. You either add the license or you toggle it on or off, right? But the actual adoption, but not just an adoption globally within your organization. To your point before, Rafa, is what does that adoption piece look like for your profile and your persona? Because somebody in finance is going to be very different to somebody in legal. It's going to be somebody different in the development world if they're developing scripts all the time and code all the time and so on and so forth. Is that something that makes your job a lot harder? And is that where Secure AI has the advancement of coming in and doing those types of personal profiles and so on and so forth?
Yeah. So we've built so many personas for various organizations, and we've got a very good understanding of what, as an example, someone, say, in HR, in retail, would be doing with AI. So we've got a very good understanding. But what we still do with every organization is build it up for them to be bespoke for them, because maybe that organization functions differently to other retail organizations. I mean, I've worked with a fair amount of retail organizations and they don't all function the same way. But retail is a really interesting kind of space because they tend to experiment a lot with AI because they're so much less regulated. And I actually think that the problem we have in Europe as a whole with AI is that whilst it's amazing to have the regulation, and I'm a big fan of making sure that the appropriate regulation is in place, I think it came in so quickly that it's now built this culture of what do we need to do to be compliant, and that's it, rather than what do we need to do to innovate. And so when you look at the organizations that are nowhere, that are not finance, not law, not healthcare, that are essentially like consumer goods and retail, they have so much more breathing space. So they do a lot more. I was speaking to a CISO this week of a massive clothing company, and she was saying to me, yeah, we've built our own in-house AI, and it does the following tests and it can do XYZ. I thought that's incredible, right? That is amazing. So I think bringing it back to a question also around sort of personas, right? And I think that's when our sort of expertise comes into it. It's making sure that we can actually say to you, well, organizations in your space are doing the following, and that the personas that they're building out look like XYZ, and this is what we've seen work. And that can be a huge time saver for companies.
That's amazing to hear. And I think if people are embracing it the right way, the possibilities are pretty much endless. And I say that from an experience of a customer of mine. I work in retail and consumer goods here at Microsoft as a compliance TS. And I've been privy to some internal demos where customers, big customers, literally change your personal shopping experience to the point where you can take a picture of yourself, upload it to this website, and it will put outfits on you and will learn about you, who you are, how you dress, what you like to do, and all the rest of it. And you can tell it, I'm going to a wedding on Saturday, I'm going to a birthday on Sunday, I'm going to a christening on Sunday, and it will literally develop you
Yeah.
an outfit to your liking. And if you say, yeah, I like it then packs it all up, brings your sizes through, puts it in a box and ships it to you. And you can literally see how you look in that outfit. And I was like, that is amazing. And it gets
Yeah.
to learn your types of styles that you like, the events that you go to. So if you go to a lot of nightclubs, it's going to continuously give you these types of outfits
Yeah.
for that particular purpose.
Yeah.
And for me, I was like, I never even thought that would be something that someone would be looking at. But the RCG area at this moment in time is, I think, and I think you've reached into it there, Rafa, is absolutely leading on this and really embracing it. But the flip side of that comes with, what do I do with all this data? What do I do with all these images? And how can I ensure this data in these repositories, in these large language models, small language models, however you're working it, is mapped back to regulations, first and foremost, but also abides to internal compliance needs requirements?
Yeah. So when we support organizations, we always make sure that everything is mapped to the AI Act if it needs to be, if they operate in Europe as well. And then it's easier to make sure even if they have a UK entity, the UK entity is also mapped to it. We also then work to NIST AI RMF and then NIST CSF, which are just sort of industry best practice. And then we also look at things like the OECD and CMMI scoring. So that is kind of a very strong arsenal of best practice standards that you can look at. And what's really interesting is this year, or sorry, I should say 2024, gosh, it's 2025 already. NIST CSF added a category to the kind of to their assessment, and the category they added was govern. And it's because they realized that that had been missing. Up until that point, it was like identifying and detecting threats and responding to threats and recover. So it was, I think, identify, protect, detect, recover. That was it. And there was nothing around governance. And so now they have governance in place. And that is really important because let's take a look at data, right? I mean, data security as an entire life cycle and journey, right? So you have bits around IDAM, so identity and access management, and making sure only the right people have access and all this stuff. But what I always find really interesting with organizations is they can have all of that stuff in place, but then they've totally forgotten that they haven't categorized data correctly, or they've totally forgotten that actually an intern has access to this and has now just made it public for everyone within an organization. And it's really not that difficult to not have the right infrastructure and governance in place. And so you can go and you can buy as many sort of tools as you want to make something secure, but if you don't configure it correctly, it just won't be secure. And that is really, really, really important. And I think user error tends to be huge in general with most things, where people think, oh, but I've bought this tool. I'll mention something, but I won't say who I was speaking to. And Ryan's smiling, so I think he knows what I'm about to say. But I was speaking to someone who is a CISO, and they said, well, I've bought Copilot. And I was like, great, what are you doing around governance? And the CISO said, what do you mean? Doesn't Copilot come with the governance? And I went, no, you've got to put governance in yourself. That's your responsibility. So it's interesting. And it's very much a mental shift, I think, because organizations are buying things like Copilot and then they're expecting it to just be a managed service without investing further in it. Like if you want it to be a managed service, you've got to invest in a managed service. You can't just expect that buying a license is automatically governance and processes and procedures and workshops.
And I think that falls nicely right into our laps, doesn't it, Nikki, within the purview or within Microsoft, right? If you take a look, and anybody watching or listening that's new to the podcast, within Microsoft, and I'm famous for saying this, and people are going to roll their eyes now, that we build everything to work together. So the actual fidelity and management of AI and securing AI and making sure it's compliant and all the rest is very easy for Microsoft. And I don't use that terminology lightly. A lot of work a lot of investments gone into the background, and we're continuously building our tool sets. And even Nikki, a couple of years ago, you put together that maturity model, and I'm sure that maturity model now is going to take a different path with AI and Gen AI and so on and so forth. So we have a plethora of tools that you can use. Let's talk about that for a moment, right, Nikki, Rafa, is the fact that, okay, I've got a license. I know my users want to embrace it, but what have I missed? More often than not, data for classification doesn't fit the requirements. Governance doesn't fit requirements. And I'm talking about retaining data in accordance with regulations, the likes of communications compliance, not even considered for supervisory elements. People tend to think of a defense in depth in a very different way to doing that with Copilot and securing Copilot. And like you said, Rafa, putting those guardrails up. But one thing I always see forgotten, and it mesmerizes me, is the discovery in depth as well. So using the audit log, Nikki, within M365, using the discovery in M365, using the analytics from DLP in M365 as well, and Purview to build a better picture. You've got your defense in depth, maybe you've got that sorted, but like I said to people, what about you? What about the forensic lookup pieces? What about the investigation pieces? Is like, well, I just use the audit log. Far more to it than that, Nikki, right?
I mean, I think what I find though, sometimes when I'm dealing with European countries, is they are reluctant to use any of those discovery things because this is personal data. So they're, beyond the GDPR standards. So if you look at kind of particularly say Norway and Germany, they've got very strict rules as to being able to investigate data. You cannot access, for example, the mailbox or the OneDrive of a user account because that is seen as personal data that, you have to have really, really strong reasons for it. So I spend quite a bit of time with companies trying to actually say, this is for security purposes. Like you have a firewall around your organization, you're inspecting that data. That's inspecting what's coming out of emails and things going there. Now we're looking at what we need to do, with AI and what information is being shared with third-party AI, even, internal ones for sort of compliance purposes. And that's kind of a really different battle. Separate out that firewall and those traditional security things that have been in place for a long time, and suddenly AI, that's something different. Oh, we look, it's the user, it's the mailbox and the OneDrive. We're not allowed to touch that. And it's getting that kind of, I think, mindset change.
But how do you deal with that on your side of the fence? You know, because I'm sure German Workers' Council is prime example. When that's come up, it's easier for us in the Purview world outside of the AI to put some, you know, admin templates, for example, Nikki, in for visibility. But how do you deal with that at that logical level when you're talking to people from legal, German Worker Councils, and so on and so forth?
I think one of the biggest things that we find is that there's a huge disconnect between the regulation and what's possible. And we see that across the board. So, as an example, last year, the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, in April, released a guideline and basically said if a customer, an employee, whoever comes to an organization where AI has been used and makes any sort of complaint, you have to be able to explain exactly how AI made that decision. And that to me is a very interesting piece of regulation and best practice because that's not really computationally possible. So I remember speaking to someone from the ICO and just asking them about it because I just thought it was really incredible that come out. But then when I look at Europe and you look at the regulation that we see with sort of the AI Act and the classification of risk and sort of systems around that specifically, that's really interesting because that's aimed at developers mostly, and it's not even aimed that much at adopters. But then adopters are still sort of so as in adopters meaning any organization that uses AI are still sort of adopting the risk classification for those AI models. And that doesn't make any sense because it creates so much work for the risk and compliance teams. And then they'll turn around and go, well, AI just doesn't make sense for us. It's a huge risk. It's a whatever. One of the things that we see in the UK, for example, is DSARs. So if someone makes a bit of a complaint, an organization has to produce a DSAR. And from a data perspective, I always think, well, as an organization, just hold the data that you have to hold on someone. Don't hold more than that. It actually creates more work for yourselves. But I think that's a thing. I think sorry, I'm not sure if that actually answers your question or not, but I think that the biggest thing that I see is just the disconnect between what's computationally possible and what computationally happens within AI models and what regulation requires of organizations. And I think my biggest concern, especially in Europe, when with things like the AI Act, and I think I've mentioned this before, right, is we rolled it out so quickly, which I'm not saying is negative in any way, but lots of organizations are now worried about, well, how do I just make sure I'm compliant? How do I make sure that I'm not getting in trouble for holding data I'm not supposed to hold? How do I make sure that everything is just, and it's really, really, really halting innovation. And organizations are now taking a risk and compliance based approach to adoption rather than an innovation based sort of approach to adoption with security at the heart of it. And I think those two things are very different. Adopt it and have security at the heart of it, but taking a risk and compliance based approach to adopting it comes, in my opinion, from a place of fear and from a place of, well, we're a team, we don't understand it, we're going to say no. We're seeing a lot of those kind of problems happening and actually being driven by regulation, which can make organizations feel uneasy. But when you take the time to understand it, you'll find that a lot of it is not actually applicable to you as an organization. And that's a huge thing to remember because lots of sort of risk, compliance, governance, procurement, legal teams will turn around and go, oh, we can't do this because of the AI Act. But if you read the different articles, so much of the AI Act is actually aimed at developers. So organizations have a lot more freedom than they think they do. And before saying no to something, really make sure you understand the regulation or bring someone on to help you understand it, because that regulation is aimed at the Microsofts and the Open AIs and the organizations that are developing AI, not that are adopting AI. So before you say no, really understand it.
That's really well put. Thanks, Rafa. Just one thing you clicked onto there, and I think, Nikki, this is coming up a lot for me. I'm not too sure about you on your side. It is that subject right request, that DSAR request. As you said, Rafa, we do get a lot of these in this region particularly. And I am seeing more and more customers now consider M365 Copilot as a workload to go and grab that DSAR subject right request. And for anybody watching or listening, that's available today. You know, me and Nikki did a session last week, which probably will be released next week. And Nikki has a great blog on understanding your data landscape. But those locations are already there for you to pull that DSAR information back. M365 Copilot is just going to be added onto that. And I'm sure you're going to update that with that workload, aren't you, Nikki? Yeah. So it's there. It's there today, Rafa, Nikki. You know, and customers are like, oh, God, what are we going to do about data? We've already taken care of that at Microsoft. We're not going to give you a tool and just leave this data hosted in this repository that nobody can bring back the data, and you can also retain it as well. So if you, like going back to the AI Act or whatever regulatory alignment there is, I'm sure, Rafa, you probably are seeing now more and more regulators or even more and more organizations starting to think about, okay, maybe we should be retaining these prompts for quite a while now, 2, 4, 7 years, especially if it's GDPR, personal identifying information, right?
Exactly. That is a thing to be aware of. So with AI, I mean, it's very different depending on what regulator we're talking about, right? So if we're looking at things like the FCA, the ICO, if we're looking at the EU, there are different times, including GDPR, there are different times you have to hold data for, and that could be X number of years. So that is something really important to be aware of. But that's where I actually think, Ryan, the tool that you just mentioned is really important, because I mean, we've seen organizations that don't have things like DSAR tools in place, and it can take genuinely weeks and weeks just to produce one. And that is such valuable time away from someone that can be doing really important work. So we're only going to live in a more data-driven world. Not yesterday, 2 days ago, DCIT announced that data centers are now classified as national critical infrastructure. So they're expecting data to keep growing and growing, and data collation to keep growing, and data storage and migration to keep growing. So if you look at how much data is growing, and if you're trying to convince me that one person in a compliance or in a risk team can deal with the growing requirements of that, I mean, I'd love to meet this person, because surely they're like a billionaire if they figured out how to keep up with that. You've got to have a tool in place to help you with that. It's just not humanly possible. And that is actually a big thing, that announcement from DCIT. So investing in data security is very important. And actually, DCIT said that they now view those data centers as having a significant impact on the market economy. So they recognize, and national security. So they're recognizing the impact of data centers on security, on the market. And so it's really important to have tools that manage it. And something else that's coming actually from a data perspective is they also announced that they're going to empower regulators even more to be able to go after organizations if organizations are not managing their supply chain from a data security risk. So if you don't have a data security tool in place, what you just spoke about, Ryan, is something I would seriously consider if I was an organization, because the need and the requirement and the regulation is intensifying, as we've seen from the announcement this week on data security. So having a tool that you can trust is vital.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm absolutely in agreement with that. And it's good to see that there is some processes coming down the line that's gonna I won't say force, but push people in the right direction is probably the right thing. Just before we wrap up, just as you were talking there, Rafa, and I think we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, Nikki, is those who are doing subject right requests, are struggling to meet that timeline. We are now seeing customers using the likes of Copilot to automate those e-discovery and data subject right requests into their environment by just using a simple Microsoft form. So when that data comes in, the individual's name into that flow, and then Copilot Security, which obviously works, uses AI in the background, goes off and creates that e-discovery case, gathers all that data and puts it into a review set for an individual just simply to go into the portal and review the data to ensure, A, the data is to the standard that they need it to, and obviously to pass that data on to the individual in the background. So Purview in itself, Microsoft in itself, we are using our own tools to make things a lot easier by using AI in the background to generate those time-consuming tasks, specifically those that you have a deadline to. And it will actually instruct the user in the background, or the e-discovery practitioner, or the admin or HR person in the background, you got 28 days to do this. You've got 10 days left on this, so on and so forth. So we can embrace our own tool to do that, which I think is amazing, and probably a perfect place to stop the podcast and wrap up for today. So Rafa, amazing time with you again. I always love spending time with you. It's always intriguing and I always learn a lot. So thanks for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Cheers again, Nikki. We'll see you all next time. Thank you very much for joining us.